Ladies and gentlemen, members and guests, esteemed press, candidates, and future boss, good morning, and welcome to another beautiful day in Port Angeles. And it is beautiful. The sun is out, and democracy continues on. Here we are in our second political forum. Like last week, we are featuring a race that has huge implications to the business environments of Clallam County. And just like last week, the county commissioners are a body of three. Who you elect is 33%, a third of all decision making. So we need to listen to these candidates and choose wisely. With that said, I don't want to take up any more time on this important debate, so let's move right away to introductions and start with our forum. First of all, it's with pleasure that we welcome to our group the challenger, Democrat Mark Ozias. Welcome. And incumbent Republican Jim McEntire. Jim, welcome. Just so everybody knows, the forum and the rules are pretty easy. Each candidate will open up with a 5-minute statement, position, etc. We'll then go into 2 minutes where you can add to it, refute, rebut, whatever. Then we go to questions, and this is important. We always take questions from members first. We love visitors. We hope you'll join. One of the greatest privileges is you're first in line on questions, and then we go to a minute close. With that said, we had a sophisticated guess the number, and Jim McEntire won. So Jim, you'll start with 5 minutes.
Thank you. Hopefully I won't take up all my 5 minutes. I will skip the biographical piece because all of you know me, I think, pretty well, except to say one of the things that I have been focused on for the last 8 years, first as a port commissioner and for the last 3.5 or so as a county commissioner, is finding ways to push our economy along. An inadvertent part of that has been helping John and now Terry sell newspapers. I seem to show up in the paper quite a bit. That's because, and I think most of you know this as well, I'm a son of the South. I grew up in Athens, Georgia. There's two kind of Southerners. Ones that don't talk at all, and ones that can't quit talking. And I think I'm probably the latter rather than the former. My brother is the former. He takes after my dad. I'm the latter because I take after my mother. So just briefly, I think the history that you'll agree of both of my terms in office, one as a port commissioner and the second so far as a county commissioner, has been to keep the promises that I've made. I've made very few because I want to make sure that the ones that I do make I can keep. And those promises have been essentially to find ways to get behind our economy and push as hard as I can. Lately, the way to do that has been not only to keep sales and property taxes level, but to try to cut them where we can. We have done so, the three commissioners have done so in respect to sales taxes that are collected outside of the cities. And I'm pursuing the answer to a question currently to see if I can find a way to suggest to my colleagues that we take the property tax levy on personal property, tangible personal property, the things, the equipment that businesses use to engage in their business, that we can take the county levy on personal property, tangible personal property, to zero. It's the only way I can think of to target tax relief to businesses and improve their bottom line so that they can thrive, not just survive, and hire more people and grow their business. As you all know, I'm sure, the more money businesses have to reinvest in their businesses, the better off that business is ultimately going to be and perform and contribute to the economy and fundamentally fill market needs. So that is my pitch. I will not hesitate and I will say this now so I don't forget to say it later, I will not hesitate to ask for your support and your vote to return me to office for the next 4 years, because what you have seen to date is what you can expect to see continue for the next 4 years if I am fortunate enough to be returned to office. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. And now, Mark.
And I, too, would like to thank you all very much for the opportunity to be here this morning. It was nice to meet many of you before the meeting. And because many of you don't know me, I am going to spend a couple minutes telling you a little bit about my background. I have been a lifelong student of politics. I was a graduate of the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington, with a degree in politics and government. Although this is the first elective office that I've sought. I have a lengthy career in nonprofit development and management. That includes a stint as a director of planned giving at Virginia Mason Medical Center in Seattle, as well as being a founding member of a group called Social Venture Partners, which was attempted to take some of the tenets of venture philanthropy and turn those toward, venture capitalism and turn those toward philanthropy. When my wife and I moved to the Swim area in early 2004, it was to open a business. And in the almost 12 years that we've lived here, we've owned and operated 2 independent businesses. The first one being a wholesale and retail plant and produce business, which eventually evolved into the small business that we're best known for, which was called the Red Rooster Grocery. We were open in downtown Sequim for just shy of 5 years. We decided to close the business ultimately because we discovered that we didn't enjoy being in retail enough to continue doing that for the rest of our lives. However, in the time we were open, our little business circulated hundreds of thousands of dollars through the local economy and provided me with a very good grounding of the role that businesses such as yours play in our economy and what it means to be a small business owner and what those priorities are. In the last 2 years, I've gotten back into the nonprofit world, and I currently serve as the executive director of the Sequim Food Bank. I'm thrilled to be running for the position of county commissioner. It's a fantastic opportunity, and I'd like to just tell you very briefly in my opening statement about what my priorities are. My number 1 priority is working to build a more diverse local economy. It's very easy to just focus on what the next big thing might be, but we need to take a much more broad-based approach to thinking about our local economy. We should be thinking about the next big thing because we have to keep our eyes on the big picture, but we should be doing a lot more to support the dozens, hundreds of local entrepreneurial business people who have already chosen to make Clallam County their home and who are already employing themselves and others and who are the job creators of the future. Excuse me. My second priority for the county is I think we need to do a better job of strategic planning. And that's a term that we hear quite frequently, but I don't see a sufficient amount of planning being done. We can take an issue like yesterday's issue, marijuana zoning, for example. There was not a lot of planning done. There were several years before the law was implemented. We could have looked at zoning. We could have established the rules so that when the law hit, Clallam County was ready for businesses like that, so that neighborhood groups and property owners would be secure in the knowledge that their property rights and property value would not be negatively impacted. And it could have created a stable business environment that would have attracted other businesses that could have been providing family wage jobs. One of tomorrow's planning issues is the county strategic plan. The update needs to happen next year, and I don't know that very much work has been done along those lines yet. So we really need to focus much more heavily on planning. And finally, the overarching priority that transcends any particular issue is I have a very strong commitment to finding new ways to engage citizens and stakeholders in our county government. And anyone who's ever been to a public meeting has witnessed the same thing, which I witness frequently, which is you get up to speak and you know that the decision has already been made. And that needs to change because we all need to be engaged in our county government. So with that, I thank you again for being here. I look forward to earning your vote. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mark. All right. Jim, 2 minutes. Want to add anything?
Sure. Just to clarify, we are unique, as you all know, amongst all the 3,000 some odd counties in the United States, in that we have an elected director of the Department of Community Development. Our charter, our county charter, assigns that elected official the task of advising the county commissioners, the ones who actually enact the ordinance that contains the comprehensive plan that my opponent referred to as the strategic plan. And we must not intrude ourselves into her or his, depending on whoever the elected official is, ability to craft the draft of the comprehensive plan that then comes to the commission. So we three commissioners must not intrude and get ourselves wrapped up in the job of the community development director. We must wait and give that official the opportunity to advise us. Then we can do our work to either enact, not enact, or amend and then enact whatever plans or draft ordinances or what have you that come to our desk from the Community Development Office. So I won't talk anymore. I think we really just need to get to your questions.
Thank you. Jim and Mark, anything else to add or clarify?
Sure. Just very briefly, I understand the commissioner's role with relation to other elected officials, but really the job of county commissioner is to provide leadership. And you can slice that a lot of different ways. Our county charter has elevated a certain number of values that we're asking our leaders to achieve. The values as enumerated in the county charter are collaboration, accountability, cooperation, partnership with industry, and customer service. And when I look at the history of the last several years, I personally have not seen those values, I don't see them being put into action. And my belief that the job of a leader and the job of a county commissioner is to find ways to take those values and turn them into action and turn them into reality on the ground.
Okay, thank you. So now we get to the good part, questions, and I know that John was wise and came up to me right away with a big smile and said he had a question. So let's see what you were so giddy about, John.
Thank you. This is a partisan race, and over the last 2 years we've had Democrats, Republicans, and Independents on our commission. What attracts you to your particular political persuasion, and what disagreements do you have with opposing views?
And Mark, we start with you.
Thank you for the question. I do have a D after my name. I've generally been a Democratic voter my entire life. However, I consider myself a pragmatist, not a partisan. And my opinion is that the more that partisanship is a factor in our county governance, the worse off we all are. I think that when you're one of three commissioners, when you're three commissioners among a larger group of electeds, when you have to work with other governments and other organizations, that there's really no place for partisanship because it serves to drive us in opposite directions, and our job is to do what's right for the entire county. And my opponent's recent decision to appoint a friend as a pro tem member to take a vote was an example of a partisan decision. And in fact, the pro tem commissioner who was appointed was quoted in the paper as saying that was a good thing, that these are partisan positions, and so partisan decisions ought to be made. And I personally believe that that's the wrong way to look at being county commissioner, and that's the wrong type of leadership for the county.
Any disagreement with your opposition views?
Excuse me?
Your disagreement with opposing views? With independents or Republicans?
Yeah. Oh.
You can answer that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are, of course, there are the views of my opponents that I don't agree with, but as it turns out, there are a number of things that we do agree on. And in fact, right before the meeting today, we were talking about one of those many points. So, and I think that when you don't agree with someone else, as a commissioner, your job is to make sure that that person's voice is still heard and still valued. And that's really my focus.
So Jim, why an R?
Why an R? Well, I start first with philosophy, political philosophy. I grew up in a family and in a part of the country that values freedom, individual choice, and the ability to live one's life by one's own lights, the ability to live one's life according to what the Declaration of Independence says is the pursuit of happiness. So I believe out of that, and that started very, very early, out of that I believe government should intrude as little as possible in people's individual choices about what things they're going to do for a living, where they're going to live, what they can do with their property. As a matter of fact, our state's constitution says the task of government is to preserve and protect individual rights. So from that philosophical underpinning came when it came time for me to decide whether or not to run for a partisan office. It seemed like to me the best label that fit the philosophy that I hold close and dear was Republican. And I certainly agree with my opponent that political partisanship has no place in the people's business. Would that were true all the time, because there's no such thing as a Republican or Democrat road or pothole or any of that kind of thing. What we do in county government, as in most things in local government, is just what I call meat and potatoes stuff. We fund sheriff's deputies, the jail, parks, elections, on and on and on. Those things are not partisan. They are very businesslike. They're very pragmatic. And it's the style that I like best is what I promised 4 years ago that I would conduct myself, in how I would conduct myself. That is collegial, common sense, conservative, and that kind of thing. And I think I have done that. With respect to appointing somebody as a pro tem, why wouldn't I choose somebody that I know and trust and who shares the philosophy of government that I do to stand in my place when it appears that I might be conflicted in whatever decision that I'm called on to make. So that's what you should expect. That's what the citizens of our county should expect, that each one of their elected officials should conduct themselves with sensitivity, not only to substance, but appearance. And so the voters of my district 4 years ago chose to elect me to this office, knowing full well what my philosophy of government was, because I was very clear about how I would conduct myself and what I would try to do when I was in office. So it certainly follows that when comes time for me to appoint or nominate a pro tem and vote on that person, it would be somebody that I know and trust.
Did I see one of our fine committee chairmen, Harry Bell, has a question?
And so, this is not a partisan question. If you truly want to be nonpartisan, what that tells me is that you don't necessarily follow the Republican values or the Democrat values. So what I'd like to hear each of you tell me is, you, Jim, as a Republican, what issues and values that are traditional to demonstrate to me that you are thinking for yourself and not as just a Republican? I would ask Mark for you to do the same.
What do I object to? Boy, that's a tough question.
You can think about it and answer later.
I'd like to see them on their feet now.
Let me first start by kind of expanding a little bit in a little different way on the philosophy that I hold dear. Somebody asked me a long time ago what my political philosophy was, and I said, well, I am kind of an eclectic mix of Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and Ayn Rand. Probably just because of her first name. So, if there are things that I disagree with, and I can't think of any example, it might be in the latter category. I tend to be, as you've heard me say just a moment ago, I tend to be a little bit more libertarian when it comes to social things. I'd like to, as I've said before a moment ago, I like to let people live their own lives. I think it's best for government to let people make their own individual choices about how they're going to conduct their own lives and those of their family. And so if there are things that I disagree with, it's probably in that area someplace. But I can't come up with anything right now that's germane to county government, except maybe some of the things that are possible, or at least potentially possible, in the shoreline management plan or the comprehensive plan about land use. Property rights are fundamental to our system of government.
Mark, any proof of independent thinking over your party?
I would immediately point to my experience as a business owner, and I believe that it's common for Democrats or progressives or liberals, however you want to say it, to not really understand business and to not understand the role that taxes play and to not understand how difficult it can be as a business owner to achieve positive things for the community. It would seem to me that we ought to be, and this is not necessarily something that the county has the ability to control, but in general, we ought to be incentivizing business owners to hire people, to provide jobs, to build the economy. And in fact, the incentives, unless you have a really great accountant, are all wrong. It's very difficult. It's very expensive to hire people and to provide wage jobs. And so I think that that perspective that I bring provides a much more broad perspective than simply a partisan point of view.
Any questions from behind me? Kai, I know you've been waiting.
I'd like to ask the candidates their views on the actions of the Department of Ecology with respect to this county and how they affect the county, with specific reference to the WIRA 18 East water rule and the actions of the Department of Ecology there, the role of the Washing Water Trust, and if elected, what actions, if any, as commissioner would you take to either enforce, try to change, or make any other modifications to these rules?
And Mark, you're up first.
All right, thank you for the question. Water and the availability of water is one of the most important, if not the most important, long-term strategic issue for the county. And in general, I am in favor of the WIRA 18 rule because it is an attempt at compromise, and it's an attempt to involve all of the different partners in order to balance the use of that limited resource. And if we're looking toward the long term, we want to continue growing the county, growing the county's economy, accommodating more people, then we need to ensure that there's going to be sufficient water for all of our needs. Now, having said that, I'm going to say that the yellow area, as it's called, is a huge problem with the rule. And in fact, I think that the problem stems from a lack of understanding of the importance of property rights. And in fact, it might only be 9 or 10% of the total parcels in the county that are in that yellow area, but the fact that the rule was set up with no possibility for mitigation is a significant flaw. And we ought to be doing a number of things to try and work with the Department of Ecology to change that. And and the Washington Water Trust and other partners. So I believe that the rule itself is sound for those who are not in the yellow area. There's the ability to purchase mitigation, and the trust in the mitigation system is working relatively well. But we really need to focus on making the yellow area go away, and that has to come primarily from the Department of Ecology, and we need to work proactively with our other partners to find a way to make that happen.
Jim, water and
Water. I find myself talking about water both in terms of supply and what you do after you use it. Who knew? My opposition to the water rule is well known. I don't need to show you the graphs because I've shown you the graphs before. There's a general uptrend in Dungeness River flow ever since 1988, which was the last year that field measurements were taken on fish habitat. And the measurements were theoretical, not practical, because the measurements posited that there would be more water in the river than ever has been during the salmon spawning times of year. And so the rule is overdone. If we have to have a rule, it is certainly not the right rule. I don't think we need a rule to begin with. The second point is, I was sitting in a Carlsberg Community Advisory Committee meeting when we were talking about the wastewater collection and ultimate treatment system there. The hydrogeologist that built the groundwater model that the rule is based on, the science that the rule is based on, said in my hearing there's at least 90 cubic feet per second of groundwater that flows out to marine waters in the rural area, in the general rural area. So 90 CFS is a lot of water that never sees the light of day. So I cannot be convinced that we're running out of water on the east end of the county. I think there is more than sufficient water for the theoretical maximum number of wells and houses out to infinity. That whole impact on groundwater, this gentleman calculated, was less than 4 cubic feet per second to surface water flow. That, I would think, is within the measurement error. 4 cubic feet, you can't really measure all that well. And so that's the total of everything from now until infinity as far as the impact goes. Second, or the third point actually, it's been 2 years since the rule has been in place, more than 2 years. I was able to convince the legislature to provide about $2 million so that the water bank could be stocked with mitigation water so that people could not be impeded in getting building permits and doing what they wanted to do to develop their property. The yellow area exists because the Dungeness Water Exchange hasn't solved the mitigation problem yet, which is not a difficult problem to solve. It's simply just putting your mind to it and getting projects done and accumulating the mitigation in that particular area that needs to be done. Can be done, should have been done a long time ago, hasn't yet been done. The water exchange, and for the future, the water exchange is a private entity, not under contract at all with the Department of Ecology. It has a mitigation plan that the department approved, but a water bank such as what we have operates without any regulatory framework whatsoever. There's state statutes that enable the existence of a water bank, but such an entity is not subject to the Utilities and Transportation Commission. They don't have to register a tariff or a rate structure with anybody. They operate completely free from any kind of regulatory framework. I submit that it's really bad public policy to have a private entity control water, which we know is fundamental to both living for people and animals and plants and for property rights. If you don't have water, you cannot get a building permit. And so I would want to try, if I'm returned to office, I would want to try to find a way with the Department of Ecology to take the water exchange into county government so that it could be both transparent and so that some action could be taken to solve the problem with the way the rule doesn't work today. The rule needs to work. If we gotta have a rule, if we do have a rule, it needs to work. It doesn't work today, and ecology has not stepped up to make it work or to encourage the water bank to make it work. I think the county government should take that over so that we can be transparent and accountable to the people, and we can provide the mitigation water necessary for property development in the areas where there is not a possibility of that these days.
Okay, next question. Mark, welcome.
Well, you talked a bit about incentives for businesses in the community or ways to help them. Can you elaborate more? I mean, it's easy for politicians to say, yeah, we're going to do all this kind of stuff, but what specific things are you considering or you think might be possible here to help small businesses do better in Clallam County?
So Jim, how to help small business?
Good question, Mark. We have already done a substantial part of that. There's very little in the way of specific business regulation that the county imposes on businesses. The major thing that the county can do is what I referred to earlier about our tax structure. We have accomplished a reduction in sales taxes, and I mentioned a plan that I have, if I can find a legal way to do it, to take the county tangible personal property tax to levy amount to zero. That is about $250,000 worth of revenue reduction to the county. I don't think that's a problem, but it certainly would be a help to businesses such as, capital-intense businesses such as logging companies, construction companies, and so on and so forth. Bed and breakfasts even, because of all their furnishings and so forth. That hits them as well. The main thing that the county government does, and we distinguish between county and city because those distinctions are very important. The main thing that county government can do in the 4 urban growth areas that we have, which is where development is possible in the future, is to do things like that we have done in Carlsberg to provide for a greater density there through the wastewater treatment system, and to avoid the possibility of lawsuits that result in building moratoriums that we saw for 4 years or so in Carlsberg. That stunted business activity there quite substantially. The comprehensive plan coming up is also an opportunity to make sure that we've got development regulations that provide sufficient zoning or land capacity for commercial and industrial purposes. I'm not sure I haven't taken a look at that yet, but that's what I intend to do for sure when the comprehensive plan comes to the commissioners for consideration. So those are the things that occur to me. If there are other things that I haven't thought of, I would certainly appreciate hearing from this group and other groups about things that we may be able to accomplish. But in the main, the county government doesn't have a lot of structure that impacts businesses from a regulatory standpoint or any of that stuff.
So Mark, if elected specifically, what would you do to help small business in our economically depressed county?
Mark, thank you for the question. I think that we need to look at building a diverse local economy from a lot of different perspectives. One example that I think is illustrative of the type of role that the county can play to help support and elevate small and local businesses would be to look at the WSU Extension Office, which has an economic development portion of its mission that relates to small ag and small food producers. And those are a significant portion, or they could be a significant portion of the county's economy. If we look next door to Jefferson County, we see a fully funded extension office that has been able to provide coordination, marketing, and other support to their small agricultural community, and consequently it's thriving, and it is a very significant portion of their economy. So restoring the county's portion of funding to our extension is one example. We also need to make sure that we're investing in the infrastructure that's necessary to support growth. Completing the Carlsberg Sewer Project is certainly one good example. And finally, we need to look much more broadly than just in terms of the economy or economic development. As many of you know, a lot of businesses, particularly here in Port Angeles, are really struggling with some community health issues, struggling with homelessness and drug use, and a difficult business environment due to issues like that. And so another thing that the county ought to be doing is really making sure that we are focusing on community health and focusing on working with the city of Port Angeles and other partners to ensure that we're doing everything we can to give businesses, to give all of you a positive environment and an attractive environment for to operate and to attract customers.
Okay. I believe we have past president Dick Pilling has a question.
Let's go back to water for a minute. The term water bank is not a correct term. It implies that we're saving water somewhere to issue, and since we eliminated dams, that's no longer the case. We still have huge amounts of water that flow into the sea during the rainy season, the wet season, the winter season, and not very much during the summer. Is there any plan? I've heard before about plans of creating reservoirs. We don't use the term dam anymore, but reservoirs. Is this on? Because it seems to me to just be foolish to let millions of gallons of water flow into the sea at certain times of the year and not have any at the rest of the time.
So then, Mark, any ideas on storing water?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, this is really highlights the importance of planning. And I believe that the general consensus is that the future that we're looking at is one where winters are generally going to be warmer. Snowpack is generally going to be less. We're going to, more likely than not, we will be less able to rely on that snowpack as the water bank, the real water bank that we traditionally have. And so looking at storage is one of our most important long-term strategic planning issues. I think that there are several different ways to look at the issue. There's planning going on to look at a large 70-acre reservoir off the Dungeness River. It's an expensive project. The figure I've heard is $30 million. So that's a long-term solution that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of cooperative effort to put together. I know that other organizations like the Jamestown Clallam Tribe and the Clallam Conservation District have looked at other opportunities like a series of smaller reservoirs or water retention facilities. It looks like that might not be feasible, but it's perhaps another possibility. And then finally, I think we probably need to look more actively at water recharge and doing a better job of putting water back into the system all throughout the year using new recharge opportunities and recharge facilities. But the importance of planning for our future, and the importance of capturing that water is only going to grow.
Jim, any ideas on ways to store water?
Those are called, yeah, that's,
Feel free.
I might just do that. I agree with my opponent. I think it's wise to look at things that we can do. I don't know how we're going to get past the cost unless the legislature decides to help us out with some of those things, because the county government certainly cannot carry the cost of a $30, $40 million reservoir with the current resources. But yeah, those are things to be looked at. There's a look right now to do such a thing, to capture stormwater flows for irrigation purposes in the dry times when the irrigators have agreed that they're not going to draw water from the river for the agricultural users that take advantage of the irrigation system in the east end of the county. That's worth a look. And I would be certainly happy to work with our legislative delegation, as I have successfully done with the water rule, to see if we could come up with some resources, if that's a good idea. And that should be done in collaboration with, of course, the City of Sequim, Conservation District, Water Users Association, the ones that are run the irrigation ditches and so forth. Those are all good things. But unless it quits raining, I don't think we have much of a problem. You know, Mother Nature takes care of aquifer recharge for us pretty much in the wintertime. That's you know, if it ever quits raining here, we got a whole different problem to solve. But I don't see that in the cards. It's difficult for the weather guessers to get the weather right here. So I am not certain how we can predict with any kind of certainty whatsoever what the weather is going to be like 5 years from now to do any kind of substantial planning on that. The weather is what the weather is. The wind blows from the west in the wintertime, bringing maritime air over here, over the top of the land, and precipitation falls out of that. Those are just the fundamentals of our particular geography here. If that changes, then we've got a whole different set of circumstances that we're going to have to deal with. But until that day, I think we can probably count on the rain falling in the wintertime and taking care of groundwater recharge. And we can think about ways to take advantage of that and store that water for some kind of purpose, not necessarily drinking purposes, but for other purposes in the dry time of the year.
So George probably biked here just to ask this question.
What role do you believe the EDC should play in our county, and if elected, re-elected, how is your support?
I have been here in this very room talking about that subject. And in some cases, I think some of you may not have agreed with me about the particular solution that I espoused at that time for the EDC. If we don't have a county-wide economic organization that's private sector, we would have to invent one. That does not at all disparage groups such as this, chambers of commerce, industry groups, the Builders Association, the Timber Action Committee, any of those organizations. That does not disparage that whatsoever. But you have to have, in my view, a private sector organization, because they can speak with authority from the business community to government, to tell government what the business community needs in terms of regulatory structures, infrastructures, and so forth. But that voice has got to be comprehensive of the entire county. So there's a lot of different ways that you could set that up. The port could be a possibility to house such an organization, but the port is a government. It would be a very great temptation for those of us in other governments to say, okay, the port's got that, they're going to do it, I don't have to pay attention to it. Wrong. Every local government needs to pay attention to their impact, either positive or negative, on the county's economy. the county government has a great deal to do with the county economy. And so I think the EDC and EDC is worthy of our support. I would much rather see the majority of that support come from the private sector, and I made that very plain. But I do think that we need an effective EDC that has the courage to tell us government guys what we might not necessarily want to hear.
So then, Mark, any ideas on the EDC and how you as a commissioner or the county could encourage, steer, support the EDC?
Yeah, absolutely. The EDC is clearly an important organization within the county. It's one of multiple organizations that has an economic development function. I mentioned the Extension Office earlier as another. Of course, the port is the other large one. And they each play a slightly different role, or they each ought to be playing a slightly different role. And in my opinion, the EDC has been too focused on looking for the next big business. You know, what's the new thing that's going to come and save our peninsula's economy? And I do think that we ought to always be looking for that, but I would like to see our EDC spend an equal amount of energy and an equal amount of resource finding ways to promote and support existing businesses. And to a certain extent, I believe that the county's role is to provide leadership and coordination among the various economic development groups, organizations, and places that have that as a function of their mission to make sure that they're working together. I think we've seen a history here recently of the EDC and the port not working very productively together in order to try and accomplish something important. The Composites Recycling Technology Center has tremendous potential. It's the kind of big new thing that takes advantage of our natural resources. But boy, it was fought tooth and nail by the director of the EDC all along. And I really believe that the county's role vis-a-vis the EDC and other organizations is to provide leadership and coordination so that each is pursuing its own function in the most productive way.
And before we get to our next question, and pursuant to our bylaws and with understanding that Jim has to get to a meeting at 9, Madam Chairman, I move that we extend our meeting up to 15 minutes to accommodate any questions.
Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much.
And then with that, and for the second week in a row, Bill Feely has a second thought of the day.
It's not so much a thought, but I appreciate your fact that you'd like to get rid of personal property tax. I think it's something to do with communism. And B&O tax would be a good one to get rid of. But yesterday I was doing an invoice and wrote it out, had it all nice and pretty, and I realized, oh, it's in the county. It's 8.2%, not 8.4%. So I had to redo it. So how does that benefit the business owner?
So that's it.
Jim, I'm Jim.
Okay, so Mark starts off. So the rollback of taxes and how with it in different jurisdictions, does that overall benefit the county?
No, the business owner.
Right, no, you're right.
The business owner.
The rollback of sales tax is very difficult to show the benefit to the vast majority of business owners. For many business owners, it actually requires resetting up your system and doing things differently. My view on that tax cut is that it makes a great headline. Nobody enjoys paying taxes, and many of us, especially people who have owned businesses, understand the onerous role that taxes can play. But when we look at this particular sales tax cut, the benefit to any particular individual is extremely dilute compared to the hole that's placing in the county budget. And although the economy is picking up, the county's still looking at a projected deficit for 2016, and that doesn't include new requests by department heads, a total over $2 million. So at a time when we're looking to find ways to restore county services, to plan for some really important things, to improve our focus on community health, to put that kind of a hole in the county budget when the effect for individuals is dilute, and when the effect for most, not all, but most business owners is non-existent, to me, is not the right policy to have.
And then to follow up with that idea, so do you favor any rollbacks on costs to businesses in Clallam County? Which was kind of what your question was as well.
Any rollbacks?
So any other ideas
businesses?
any other ideas as a county commissioner on how you could lower costs for businesses in Clallam County?
Sure. I think that I'm going to go back to the concept of the county providing leadership and coordination. My experience, and this goes across every industry in the county, is that we have a history, for some reason, of not talking to each other. There are people engaged in business here, and here. They all have similar goals. They should be working together. And in fact, what we're finding is that business owners like, say, the owner of the Green Flame, which is a new business here in Port Angeles, on her own, she's developed a collaborative business model that allows her to be successful. If the county, whether that's the county itself, whether that's because we're supporting to the level that we need to the economic development functions of the different entities that do that, whether it's helping to provide the infrastructure, whether it's making sure that people are talking to each other, that's really the job. That's the role that the county government can play, is providing that coordination and providing that leadership to encourage business owners and people from different sectors to work together to accomplish common goals.
Jim, so the disparity on the rollback where you live, and any other ideas on how to help business?
Well, when I built my house, my wife and I built our house 6 years ago. I could have certainly used a couple of decimal places less of sales tax at that time, because
That's you, that's not the business.
I understand that, but the idea here is disposable income. If government can burden family budgets, individual or household budgets, to the least extent possible, that provides more disposable income in the community for those folks to spend in whatever ways they choose or save. The other piece of that is to look more broadly at what can be done to get a greater level of return from our economic assets. This is not a tax question, but it certainly is a question about one of the industries that has been historic in our community, and that's gets right to disposable income. I'm speaking of timber harvest. That's the reason that I wanted to get elected by 21 counties to sit on the Board of Natural Resources to represent all those 21 counties that have timber trust lands that the state DNR manages, because that's jobs, that's disposable income, that's community wealth. Community wealth is built by making stuff or growing stuff and selling it to somebody else. Exporting goods, importing dollars. So anything that we can do as a county government to get a greater level of return on the economic assets of the community is a good thing, because that provides a greater level of community wealth. Anything that we can do to leave more money in household budgets or business budgets is a good thing, because it gives you the choice of how to use that money. The last point here is just the general stance. Business is organic. The way this country, with the American system of private enterprise, has operated successfully for the last couple of 100 years, 300 actually, is people have good ideas, they get them financed, they create a business, they grow the business, they make money. It's not the job of government to coordinate the economy. That's the fundamental philosophical difference that I have in my opponent. The way America works best, and the reason why we have not seen as good of an economic recovery nationally as we have seen over the last 7 years, is because we have moved away from that philosophy. The choice needs to be left to the maximum extent with you as business people and with you as family members and as individuals. That's what I stand for.
And now we'll go to the last question, and because we're running out of time, I'll limit the candidates to 2-3 minutes to answer this. And I see that newly appointed timber guru and former County Commissioner Phil Kitchell has a question.
This is not a timber question. There's been a proposal made to the county to establish a veterans court. I would ask each one of you to explain what that is and whether or not you would support that effort.
Jim, the family court.
The concept, as I understand it, is a court that's similar to drug court, where veterans that have things that trouble them can be dealt with in a special and separate way by a judge that takes into account the things that they have suffered in the defense of our country. That's the basic concept as I understand it, and I would certainly support that, and I would love to see if we could find some money to establish such a court here this next fiscal year.
Mark, ideas on the court?
Well, my understanding of the court is the same as my opponent's, and I guess I would just underscore how important I think a concept like this is. I know through my work at the food bank what a significant challenge many veterans on the peninsula face. At our food bank, about 10%, and that's in Squim, of course, about 10% of the people who come through our doors are veterans. The farther west you move, in the food bank world, the higher that percentage is. And veterans face significant and unique challenges here on the peninsula, and it's incumbent upon us to find ways to better support veterans and to try and provide them with access to resources and access to the kind of assistance that they need in order to be productive and healthy and healthy.
With that answer, we can get one more question in from our unnamed guest in the lightning round. Go ahead.
I'm Tim Wheeler, and I live on a farm on the banks of the Dungeness River, our family farm. We've never seen the river so low as it was this summer, and so it's scary to us. And I was very struck by Mr. Ozias' comments about looking ahead, seeing the future, and the danger of a low snowpack and low snow. So the question I have is the whole question of resources to make this happen, of some kind of water retention system. What are your thoughts, Mr. Ozias, on how to bring in those resources to pay for that kind of a system of water retention?
You got a whole minute to answer that, Mark.
All right. Well, in brief, as my opponent stated, that's going to require a large effort. That's going to require federal funding. That's going to require state funding. It's going to require county funding. It's going to take everybody working together. And that's the skill that I bring to this position. I have a long history of successful, effective leadership. And what makes me effective is that I'm able to listen to people who don't speak the same language, put them around the same table, and come to an agreement. And we're going to need to work very proactively with all of our governmental partners in order to do that. The federal government recognizes the extent of the drought this year and are already providing resources. for this year, as is the state. So when we take a look at the long term and building water retention facilities that are going to cost more than we have the ability to do, actively and positively working with those other partners to achieve the level of funding that we need to is key.
Jim, a minute to talk about money and how one goes about storing water, looking to the future.
Planning is good, predictions are difficult. I will show my graph. This is the Dungeness River gauge above the irrigation outtakes ever since 1988. The overall trend is up. Of course, this water year 2015 is going to be a low flow year, of course, but that a data point does not a trend make. So we need to be careful about what assumptions that we make about the future availability of water. It is certainly wise to think ahead, but not to panic.
Okay, with that said, before we go to the closing, first of all, I think it's always admirable that someone would go county-wide and put themselves up to not only personal attack, but questions. So let's thank members of our society for running for office. We here at the PABA truly appreciate that, and thank you, gentlemen. With that, we go to 1 minute closing, and Mark, you're on first.
As I'm out doorbelling or at the fair talking to people about the job of county commissioner, they often ask, well, what is it? And I tell them that we can look at it in a couple of different ways. One is that the role of county commissioner is to manage the budget, and that involves ensuring there's sufficient revenue to meet the necessary expenses, and it involves setting priorities. But the other way to look at it, and the way that I think is almost more important because it's the big picture, takes me back to the concept of values and finding ways to turn our county's values, collaboration, accountability, cooperation, partnership, and customer service into reality on the ground. That's a challenge of leadership, and leaders figure out how to do that. That's not happening to the level that it needs to in our county government today, and that's what I pledge to you that I will focus on and bring back to the county. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I would very much appreciate your vote in November. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Jim.
Thank you. I'm going to try for less than a minute, Andrew. See how well I do. Thank you to PAB. It's always good to be with you. I think forums such as this really provide an insight into the thinking and the philosophy of those that you want to hire to be in county government, or any government for that matter. So I commend you for taking the opportunity to have us here with you. I think what you've seen is a clear difference between me and my record and the philosophy that I espouse, and the philosophy and the worldview and the plans of my opponent. I think my record is a good one. I'm proud of it. I stand on it. I'm running on it, and I would certainly appreciate your support and your vote. Thanks again for your great questions and your kind attention.
8 seconds to spare. That's right. All right, Madam Chairman, the meeting is yours.
Any more announcements? Any more?
I will not hesitate, and I will say this now so I don't forget to say it later. I will not hesitate to ask for your support and your vote to return me to office for the next 4 years, because what you have seen to date is what you can expect to see continue for the next 4 years if I am fortunate enough to be returned to office. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. And now, Mark.
And I, too, would like to thank you all very much for the opportunity to be here this morning. It was nice to meet many of you before the meeting. And because many of you don't know me, I am going to spend a couple minutes telling you a little bit about my background. I have been a lifelong student of politics. I was a graduate of the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington, with a degree in politics and government. Although this is the first elective office that I've that I've sought. I have a lengthy career in nonprofit development and management. That includes a stint as a director of planned giving at Virginia Mason Medical Center in Seattle, as well as being a founding member of a group called Social Venture Partners, which was attempted to take some of the tenets of venture philanthropy and turn those toward, venture capitalism and turn those toward philanthropy. When my wife and I moved to the Swim area in early 2004, it was to open a business. And in the almost 12 years that we've lived here, we've owned and operated 2 independent businesses. The first one being a wholesale and retail plant and produce business, which eventually evolved into the small business that we're best known for, which was called the Red Rooster Grocery. We were open in downtown Sequim for just shy of 5 years. We decided to close the business ultimately because we discovered that we didn't enjoy being in retail enough to continue doing that for the rest of our lives. However, in the time we were open, our little business circulated hundreds of thousands of dollars through the local economy and provided me with a very good grounding of the role that businesses such as yours play in our economy and what it means to be a small business owner and what those priorities are. In the last 2 years, I've gotten back into the nonprofit world, and I currently serve as the executive director of the Sequim Food Bank. I'm thrilled to be running for the position of county commissioner. It's a fantastic opportunity, and I'd like to just tell you very briefly in my opening statement about what my priorities are. My number 1 priority is working to build a more diverse local economy. It's very easy to just focus on what the next big thing might be, but we need to take a much more broad-based approach to thinking about our local economy. We should be thinking about the next big thing because we have to keep our eyes on the big picture, but we should be doing a lot more to support the dozens, hundreds.
Because I want to make sure that the ones that I do make, I can keep. And those promises have been essentially to find ways to get behind our economy and push as hard as I can. Lately, the way to do that has been not only to keep sales and property taxes level, but to try to cut them where we can. We have done so, the 3 commissioners have done so in respect to sales taxes that are collected outside of the cities. And I'm pursuing the answer to a question currently to see if I can find a way to suggest to my colleagues that we take the property tax levy on personal property, tangible personal property, the things, the equipment that businesses use to engage in their business, that we can take the county levy on personal property, tangible personal property to 0. It's the only way I can think of to target tax relief to businesses and improve their bottom line so that they can thrive, not just survive, and hire more people and grow their business. As you all know, I'm sure, the more money businesses have to reinvest in their businesses, the better off that business is ultimately going to be and perform and contribute to the economy and fundamentally fill market needs. So that is my pitch.
One of the greatest privileges is you're first in line on questions, and then we go to a minute close. With that said, we had a sophisticated guess the number, and Jim McEntire won. So Jim, you'll start with 5 minutes.
Thank you. Hopefully I won't take up all my 5 minutes. I will skip the biographical piece because all of you know me, I think, pretty well, except to say one of the things that I have been focused on for the last 8 years, first as a port commissioner and for the last 3.5 or so as a county commissioner, is finding ways to push our economy along. An inadvertent part of that has been helping John and now Terry sell newspapers. I seem to show up in the paper quite a bit. That's because, and I think most of you know this as well, I'm a son of the South. I grew up in Athens, Georgia. There's 2 kinds of Southerners. Ones that don't talk at all, and ones that can't quit talking. And I think I'm probably the latter rather than the former. My brother is the former. He takes after my dad. I'm the latter because I take after my mother. So just briefly, I think the history that you'll agree of both of my terms in office, one as a port commissioner and the second so far as a county commissioner, has been to keep the promises that I've made. I've made very few.
Ladies and gentlemen, members and guests, esteemed press, candidates, and future boss, good morning, and welcome to another beautiful day in Port Angeles. And it is beautiful. The sun is out, and democracy continues on. Here we are in our second political forum. Like last week, we are featuring a race that has huge implications to the business environments of Clallam County. And just like last week, the county commissioners are a body of three. Who you elect is 33%, a third of all decision making. So we need to listen to these candidates and choose wisely. With that said, I don't want to take up any more time on this important debate, so let's move right away to introductions and start with our forum. First of all, it's with pleasure that we welcome to our group the challenger, Democrat Mark Ozias. Welcome. And incumbent Republican Jim McEntire. Jim, welcome. Just so everybody knows, the forum and the rules are pretty easy. Each candidate will open up with a 5-minute statement, position, etc. We'll then go into 2 minutes where you can add to it, refute, rebut, whatever. Then we go to questions, and this is important. We always take questions from members first. We love visitors. We hope you'll join.